Such articulate young people in that plenary. It was just, quite amazing and good to understand the challenges and the practical ways that they can actually respond.
Definitely, De Graaf. I think the session on financing and on the investment case in particular happens at such a critical time. Whilst we're going through the GFA, the IMF and the World Bank are currently meeting to discuss how to get human capital development outcomes back on track. And I know coming into this Global Forum for Adolescents, we know that only 1.6% of all global development spend went towards adolescents. And that's quite catastrophic when you consider that there's 1.8 billion of us globally. And I think what the investment case has unpacked further is that if we don't act between now and 2035, the cost of inaction in terms of investing in adolescent health and well-being will be at around $20.5 trillion. That's 20.5 trillion with a big T. And I think the investment case sets out quite the clear areas of investment, reducing road traffic accidents, reducing child marriages, investing in mental health, investing in education and training, investing in HPV vaccines are all critical areas of investments with exponential returns on investment for adolescents and young people. If you're following the finance session and the session on investments, I would urge you to continue to follow the money, but most importantly, let's look at holding our leaders accountable towards showing us the money and showing us more money as we move into the commitments session later today. And now on to our core sessions. The next round of them are coming up, so get ready to select which ones you'd want to join into. One is all about families. I think we all come from families, or we all have families of our own. And this session is really looking at how our families can support adolescents in challenging times. The session is called It Starts with Families, Improving Adolescent and Well-being Through Strengthened Support. There is, of course, another session, and it's about data. Yesterday, we had the session on data by the Group Marker, and this one really builds upon that. And it's really talking about how can we progress if we can't measure the impact that policy and programming is having on adolescent health and well-being outcomes. So if you're a data nerd and if you like numbers and statistics, this is definitely a session for you. And this session is called Data That Matters, Championing Adolescent Well-being Measurements.
Wow, it all sounds pretty interesting. And meanwhile, we have an important wellbeing message from poet, model, and activist Ebony Davis, plus some more exciting content. We have a recap from the Arab Forum for Adolescents. And by now, you know the drill. Enjoy the content and the sessions, and we'll see you in 50 minutes from now. See ya.
Unite! Unite! Rise! Unite! Lead! Lead!
Okay.
Hello, my name is Ebony Davis, and I'm so honored to be present at this forum today. My path has been one of searching for my authenticity, searching for my authentic truth, and being bold and brave enough to walk in that unapologetically. And I know as a youth, I wish I heard those words. I wish I knew how powerful it was to own my truth, to walk in my truth, despite pressures from the outside world, despite programming from my family or my community, the place from which I came, to really trust my heart, trust my own intuition, trust my inner guidance, and know that it's gonna take me so much further than the opinions of others. So I'll just go back to the root, go back to the start. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I was born and raised there. My childhood was not one that was super glamorous or super fancy. Both of my parents were addicted to drugs when I was born, and so I had to do a lot of work.
Welcome, everybody, to the session on data that matter, championing adolescent well-being measurement. So why do we have this session? In 2020, an adolescent well-being framework was developed, and after that, many organizations, including youth organizations and the regions of the World Health Organization, called for guidance on how to measure adolescent well-being. So WHO and PMNCH and lots of other partners from the United Nations have worked on doing exactly this, providing guidance on how to measure adolescent well-being. Today, we will give a presentation with colleagues Sarah Keogh and Titus Divala, who have been working with WHO to develop the measurement approach for adolescent well-being. We will also have some video messages from young experts that we've been working with. To start, we would love to get to know you, the audience, better. Please, if you could write in the chat your name, and if you wish, your country, age, and organization, that would be very nice. Also, throughout the session, please feel free to provide feedback in the chat. We welcome your inputs very much, and we promise to review everything carefully to inform the next steps in our work. Next slide, please. So how do we measure adolescent well-being? Click. First, we need to define what we mean by adolescent well-being. And this definition is based on the Adolescent Well-being Framework with 5 domains that you can see on the screen that was developed by many UN agencies in collaboration. Click. Second, we are developing a measurement approach. We're proposing a standard approach that is also adaptable to different contexts. Click. We have established an expert group with experts from around the world. Click. We have selected key concepts within these 5 domains on what to measure, and Titus will present these key concepts later. Click. We have identified indicators on how these concepts can be measured. Click. We have created a measurement package, and we're going to assess the usability of it. And this is exactly where we're at. The measurement package exists, but we have not yet tested it or validated it. Click. Once finalized, the plan is to distribute the measurement package to countries. Click. Third in the process will then be to measure progress in adolescent well-being in countries, for countries to use the package. Click. So countries can then use the package to measure adolescent well-being and to report on government actions. Click. And so the ultimate aim of measuring adolescent well-being is to enable countries, of course, to improve well-being of their adolescent population. Click. Finally, throughout this whole process, we are engaging adolescent and youth to bring in their perspectives. With this, I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Regina. So today we're here to present this draft approach that Regina just mentioned and to get your feedback before finalizing it. But first, what exactly do we mean by a measurement approach? So click. So the approach is not just an indicator list, although it actually does include a list. Click. It's a much more comprehensive strategy to use existing data for action, as well as collecting new data where gaps are identified, and then acting on the new data. Click. So the approach offers standard recommendations across countries while still being flexible and adaptable to different contexts. And this is important for a few reasons. Click. So first, the adolescent population across the world is extremely diverse, as we know. So in terms of age, we want the approach to be inclusive and to address the needs of all adolescents. But adolescents are at very different developmental stages between 10 and 19 years old, obviously. So we need to think about how to make sure the measurement is appropriate for these different ages and stages. We also want the approach to be applicable to specific population groups with differing needs in a country. So, for example, diverse gender identities or different abilities. We also need to take into consideration cross-country and cultural differences when building our measurement approach. So, for example, being well can mean different things to people in different contexts. And another reason for needing the approach to be flexible is because the broader global context of adolescent well-being is changing very quickly. So, for example, adolescents' living environment is evolving rapidly. You can think about social media or digital technology. And also the science of well-being is constantly advancing. Next slide, please. So before we talk about the components of the measurement approach, we'd like to first stress the importance of adolescent and youth perspectives and engagement as part of this work. Click. So it's really an essential part of developing the approach at every step of the way, and I want to highlight 3 steps in particular. Click. So first, the approach is embedded within the 1.8 million Young People for Change campaign, which, as many of you know, engages adolescents and youth in various ways. For example, in developing the original Adolescent Well-being Framework or writing background papers to guide the programming that was based on the framework. Click. Second, as we started thinking about what and how to measure, we researched literature on what adolescents and youth thought was important to them, and we brought their perspectives into our approach. And click. Finally, we directly engage young people in developing the measurement approach. So specifically, click, we involved young researchers in the expert group. And as Regina mentioned, you'll see videos from 2 of them today. Click. We then organized a consultation with youth representatives from a variety of different groups and different regions to discuss the well-being concepts to measure. And click. And now we're seeking feedback from adolescents and youth on the draft measurement approach that we're presenting to you today. So we're seeking feedback from you now as part of the GFA. So please do write comments in the chat. And we'll also be seeking feedback as part of consultations with countries in the next few months. So next slide, please. So before we go into the overview of the measurement approach, we'd like to hear from you. So through the poll, which you can see in the top right-hand corner, or which will appear, please tell us if you have used any data related to adolescent well-being in the last year or so. For example, if you work in a youth organization, maybe you might have used data to help you advocate for better well-being, or maybe to plan a program. Or if you work in a government, perhaps you use data to put a new policy in place. So please choose an answer, but also feel free to provide more details in the chat. We really want to understand how these types of data are being used in your country. And before we go further, and while you're responding to the poll, here is one of our expert group members, Anne Luterek, who will talk about the complexity of adolescent well-being measurement.
Hello, I'm Annie Terek, a psychologist, a consultant at UNESCO Youth Section, and a member of the expert group for adolescent well-being measurements. Collecting data on adolescent well-being is crucial for understanding and promoting the holistic development of young people. By measuring and monitoring their well-being, we can gain valuable insights into their experiences, the challenges, and better support their well-being. But to do so, we need to ensure that adolescents are meaningfully engaged in the process of data collection. Adolescents who face various forms of vulnerability have unique experiences and specific challenges that must be captured and taken into consideration when we talk about adolescent well-being. This enhances the relevance of measures and promotes a more comprehensive understanding of the factors that can impact well-being. But it also empowers them and allows them to be more active participants, and it communicates that their voices matter, that they have a say in shaping policies and programs that affect well-being. And in return, this actually reinforces their self-esteem and fosters a sense of belonging. So including adolescent perspective from marginalized communities also leads to more informed decision-making and the design of more specific intervention with effective outcomes. But ultimately, it's not just about including them in the data collection. It's about promoting equity, social justice, and inclusivity. It's about working towards a society when their voices are heard and their needs met. But collecting data on adolescents' well-being also comes with challenges. Science recognizes several aspects as significant in terms of well-being, but can be very challenging to measure due to the complexity and multiple factors. For instance, adolescents' sense of belonging, social support significantly impacts their well-being. But measuring the quality and depth of social connection and the subjective experience of connectedness present challenges. It involves understanding the complexity of peer dynamics, family relationship, and also require a combination of qualitative and quantitative approaches. Another example, adolescents' sense of purpose, meaning, and engagement in activities that align with their values or interests is very crucial. But quantifying and operationalizing those concepts can be very challenging because it requires exploring their motivations, subjective experiences, and also requires different approaches. So developing reliable and valid measures that capture the multidimensional nature of adolescents' well-being is essential.
Thank you, Anne. Now we would like to give you an overview of the measurement approach, including its three components and how they fit together. Next slide. So the approach has two main components, which we'll outline now. Here again, we see the Adolescent Well-being Framework with its 5 domains and different subdomains. Each component of the measurement approach corresponds to a different part in this framework. Click. The first component is the well-being indicators, which are the measures of adolescents' actual well-being status. How do we measure if they are well? These indicators would broadly fall in this pink area that you can see in the middle. And they encompass the 5 domains and the overall well-being. Click. So the second component would be the national action indicators, which will enable governments to report actions to advance adolescent well-being. These actions are foundational to the rest of the framework underlying it, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail later. Click. Supporting these components is linkages to guidance from sectors like health, education, which contain indicators that are more related to the context. For example, related to school, work, the local community, and the wider environment in which adolescents live. Next slide. So let's begin by talking about the first component, which is the well-being indicators themselves. The idea is that these indicators should cover all the 5 domains of well-being in the framework. However, since we can't measure everything, the first we had to do was to determine which concepts should be prioritized for measurement. We went through a structured process involving our expert group and other inputs to decide which concepts are most important. And what you see in this table is what we came up with. So for each domain, there are between 3 and 6 concepts which we thought were a priority. For example, if you look at domain 3 in this table, you see that the prioritized concepts are freedom from all types of violence and coercion, sense of safety in day-to-day life, sense of being treated equitably. So those are the 3 concepts within domain 3. There is also, if you see at the very bottom, there's also a cross-cutting concept, which is the overall summary of adolescent well-being. Next. So now that we have discussed what will be measured in each domain, we would like to hear from you about where you think the biggest data gaps are. Through the poll, which you can see on the right side of your platform, if you navigate top right corner of the overall platform that you're watching from, you see a sign for a poll. So in this poll, please tell us in which of the 5 domains we have just talked about you see the biggest data gaps in your country. Please choose a domain, but also we would like to hear as much as possible in terms of the context. So put that context, your information, any other comments that you have related to the domains in the chat. I'll hand over to Regina for question and answer.
Thank you very much, Titus. So now we have time for a small question and answer session, but before we go into this, thank you all very much for your responses to the first and also to this poll. We appreciate your input, and we see that over half of you have indeed used adolescent well-being data in the last year. We also see that about a fourth have not, and we're looking forward to looking at your comments in the chat more closely. Regarding the domains, also very interesting results. 0% in the safety and supportive environment so far. I believe the poll is still open. Thank you for continuing to respond to it and for continuing to put your comments in the chat. You're also welcome to put any other questions you might have in the chat, and we will answer them. Our background team will answer them as we go during the session. And meanwhile, I would like to ask Titus a question. Titus, do countries have to measure all of the concepts you have prioritized? There is quite a number of them.
Thank you, Regina. That's a very good question. So our approach is intentionally flexible because we recognize that each country has its unique context. And respecting that and understanding that the context plays quite a big role in what becomes a priority is important. For instance, an adolescent in Yemen might be facing challenges related to access to good nutrition. In my own country, in rural Malawi, an adolescent could be worrying about accessing quality education because schools are far apart. While one country might need to prioritize differently based on such specific challenges, however, we do believe that these concepts we have emphasized are fairly universal, and they do provide a solid starting point for any country and can be measured in a variety of ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Titus. And with this, I would like to hand it straight back to you for a few more slides, Titus. Thank you.
Thank you. So now that we have prioritized concepts to measure, how do we identify indicators to measure with? Well, there are lots of indicators measuring these concepts that are already available from global surveys already conducted in many countries. So rather than suggesting a completely new set of data collection or effort of data collection, why not start from what we already have within countries? So we have prepared a menu of indicators that can be derived from these global surveys. As you can see from on the screen, this is how the basic menu looks. For each prioritized concept that you saw in the previous slide, we have listed what indicators are available from each global survey. And if you see from the table, you see that we have used two colors to symbolize the different experiences. So green is where a survey has an indicator that closely matches the concept. For example, click. For adequate physical activity, the GSHS already has an indicator measuring engagement in sports and exercise. This is exactly what we need. Gray, on the other hand, is used where a survey has an indicator related to the concept of interest, but that is not quite the same. For instance, we want to focus on positive indicators where possible, and perhaps there's a survey that measures a relevant concept, but in a negative way. For example, if you want to measure the positive concept of health, sexuality, and while many surveys have indicators on sexuality, they are often more focused on avoiding negative outcomes. Click. So, for example, using condoms to avoid STIs and pregnancy. That's that kind of example. And then if you click, to complement the menu that we have just described, realizing that there is need for more to address the gaps, we will also reference additional recommendations on adolescent well-being from specialized initiatives. For example, the menstrual health and hygiene, so that countries can also refer to those if they are interested. Having a menu like this, rather than simply a list of recommended indicators to collect, has several advantages. Click. So first is it becomes an immediate resource for countries to start using right away. Click. It is compatible with existing data collection efforts and avoids duplication. Click. It focuses on data use rather than collecting new data. Click. The menu should be treated as a guide only. Countries should continue using other sources of data that they also have. We're not saying that using the menu should be the final thing to do. Gaps in current data collection will still need to be addressed by new data collection efforts. But the menu, in this case, will then be a way of helping countries identify those gaps. Next slide. So now I would like to discuss the second part, the second component of the measurement approach. These are the national action indicators. This consist of 8 indicators in 4 action areas for government reporting to stakeholders in their country about their actions to advance adolescent well-being. Click. Now you can see them, the 4 action areas with their 8 indicators. We're not showing the full definitions here, but just the broad topics. Similar to the well-being indicator menu, we would also link these to sector-specific recommendations on government actions, for example, in the health and education sectors. Next. The purpose of all this is first and foremost to support the 1.8 billion campaign and facilitate dialogue about adolescent well-being within countries. Click. In terms of the process for reporting, we see this as a country-level exercise with a quantitative component where governments would measure the 8 indicators, and also a more qualitative component in which government would then describe actions undertaken as part of that indicator to encourage within and cross-country dialogue. We would also provide guidance and support countries in this whole process. I'll now hand over to Sarah.
Thank you, Titus. So now that we've presented the different components of the measurement approach, we'd like to talk about how to use these components. So what can countries do right now? So the flowchart that I'm about to present can be used by countries to guide their measurement activities around adolescent well-being. So I'm going to present it one step at a time. So as you can see, the starting point is the Adolescent Well-being Framework, which you're very familiar with by now. Click. The ultimate goal of the measurement approach is, of course, to inform actions to improve adolescent well-being. Now, we have 2 big components to the measurement approach to achieve this goal. Click. First is measuring individual well-being status, and this corresponds in the Adolescent Well-being Framework, click, to this area in the middle, so the 5 domains and the central circle of overall well-being. So how do countries go about measuring individual well-being status? Click. The first step is identifying and assessing available data in their country, whether from routine data systems or surveys or other data sources. And to do this, we offer 2 tools to help countries identify relevant data. And these are the 2 tools that Titus just presented. So it's the list of prioritized concepts and the menu of survey-derived indicators. So this will enable 2 things. First, click. They can use these indicators immediately to feed into a process of adolescent well-being data compilation and use for action in their country. Second, click. These tools, so the list of concepts and the menu, will enable them to identify gaps in information. So what concepts are not represented by any indicators so far in their country? And then click. Stakeholders can then refer to the menu to prioritize certain indicators that they feel are important. And click. And they can then plan data collection on these indicators, either by integrating the indicators into existing data collection efforts, or if it makes sense, by thinking about running a specialized survey. So then these newly available indicators, click, will then feed into the data compilation and use process that we were talking about before. So this will generate an ever-increasing body of data for action on adolescent well-being year on year. So a couple of points for countries to keep in mind when they're prioritizing indicators for new data collection. Click. You can see them on the left-hand side here. It's good to have a mix of subjective and objective indicators to gain a more holistic understanding of adolescents' well-being. And also, wherever possible, we would recommend prioritizing positive indicators. So in other words, prioritizing the green cells in the menu that Titus presented. Now, the second big component of the measurement approach is measuring and tracking the building blocks for adolescent well-being. So click. So these building blocks are kind of the infrastructure that supports positive well-being status. So they're kind of fundamental, and you see them here as background on which individual well-being is built. So you can see these building blocks represented by the yellow background square in the figure. as well as the gray outer band circling the 5 domains. Click. Oh, sorry, yeah. So the main element that we're drawing attention to here is the reporting on national action indicators that Titus just mentioned. So the idea is that we'll provide countries with a template to enable them to carry out a structured assessment of different action areas with concrete examples from their country for each action. And the aim is for this information, click, to facilitate both country-level dialogue on how to improve the situation, but also cross-country learning, because multiple countries will be looking into these action areas and they can compare notes, not necessarily in a quantitative way. We don't necessarily want to compare them in that way, but more in a qualitative way to kind of learn from each other on what works and what doesn't. And so another part of the building blocks that we discussed a little bit, click, is the sector-specific recommendations regarding factors that broadly correspond to the grey outer band in the framework. But they could also relate to some of the domain-specific elements. But to the extent possible, as we've mentioned, we want to refer to as many of these sector-specific recommendations as possible to help support an integrated approach and also not reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good work out there. Click. So this whole measurement approach with its 2 components is supported by sustained and meaningful adolescent engagement at all steps of the process, as well as multi-sectoral collaboration. And it would definitely be good to think in more detail about how to accomplish this and perhaps offer some guidance on this for each component. So this is a summary flowchart that we'd like to distribute to countries as part of the package. And we'd love your thoughts on it, on how to improve it, or anything that's unclear. In the chat. Please post your comments in the chat. Thank you. And I think I will hand it over to Regina again.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Titus. So as Sarah just said, please go ahead, put your questions in the chat, comments. It will be great to get your feedback and your questions. Meanwhile, I would like to pose Sarah a question. Sarah, the slide you just showed talks about adolescent engagement, but how can young people actually get involved?
Well, very good question and very important question for us. So for a start, you're already involved by participating in this session, which is fantastic. Thank you so much. So please continue giving us your feedback in the chat. And we'd love to hear, for example, what you think of the measurement approach we've presented in general, but also what support you would need to get involved. For example, do you need help to identify relevant data, or do you need to learn more about how to interpret or to use data? And also to give you more guidance, we've created a 2-page guide for adolescents, which you can download from the files area on the platform for this session. And we'll also post a link in the chat if you want to just access it on the internet. So yes, so we encourage everyone to use data, identify available data, use it to advocate for better adolescent well-being in your country. And we didn't have a lot of time to talk about the national action indicators, but they do include aspects of meaningful adolescent engagement. So this is something that governments really should be focusing on. And so you can hold your governments accountable for this. So I'll stop there and hand it back over to Regina.
Thank you, Sarah. Titus, I also have a question for you. What if my country doesn't have any of these global surveys that you mentioned, surveys like the DHS or MIX or the school surveys, GSHS or HBSC, for example? No data from these global surveys. So what then? Please unmute, Titus.
Sorry about that. So if you can't find that, if you can't find these surveys in your country, they don't run in your country, it's not a problem. First, just to start by saying that these just the ones you saw on the slide are just a few examples of the surveys that we are going to include. There'll be more in our document. Additionally, if indeed there's no such a survey present in the country, we know that most countries have alternative data sources, such as other national surveys, routine information from institutions like schools, health facilities, or special or specific studies run by academics in universities. All those are important sources of data that must be used. So we believe that examining these concepts alongside indicator examples from global surveys can be insightful. The crucial thing is to begin with whatever data is already accessible within the country and then move from there. If there's genuinely no information on these subjects, the situation then presents an opportunity to advocate for integrating some of the prioritized concepts in existing surveys in your country, or even propose the initiation of new surveys to gather additional data on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Titus and Sarah. So, to introduce the last part of our session, we would like to give the floor to one of our expert group members, a member who is on the consultative group for adolescent well-being measurement, Saad Ouakas, who will talk about the importance of national leadership to drive data collection and use.
Hello everyone, this is Dr. Saad Ouakas and I am a member of the WHO Experts Group on Adolescent Well-being Measurement. I'm the North Africa coordinator of the African Youth Initiative for Climate Change. And speaking of measuring adolescent well-being, which is a crucial and urgent task to ensure a good health and well-being for adolescents, it's important to shed light about the urgency and importance of national engagement for ensuring that measurements on the local and national level. Today, WHO, PMNCH, many stakeholders have put in place different solid frameworks that are applicable on the global level to help gather that data and apply it for adolescent well-being. But what we really need is the political will on the national level to take those frameworks and those tools and to tailor them to the local context, to tailor them to the local culture, to choose the tools that are applicable to the different local context and are acceptable and doable in their national context. And we need that same political will to mobilize the resources to really go and ensure that adolescent well-being and its measurement is a priority and that resources are put in place towards that, because many low-income countries and developing countries lack those data, and it's important to have those national, regional and local aspects where we get to see the different issues and challenges that young and adolescent people in those low-income countries are facing. So that data, once identified and also once documented and shared on the global level, it will allow us to have new perspectives and new challenges that are relevant to people in our context. Speaking from the African continent, for example, where we really need such data. And once we have that data, we can build from it and ensure new solutions and practical ways for solving and for offering better health services and better support for adolescents in our countries, so we can offer them and help them to get a better well-being as adolescents. So this is why we need to support countries, encourage them and engage with them so that they can make adolescent well-being measurement a priority and invest in it with resources and with political will.
Thank you very much, Saad, for that intervention. So now that we've discussed the measurement approach, we'd like to talk about the next steps and how you can use the approach to take action to improve adolescent well-being in your country. So next slide, please. So the immediate next step for us is to finalize the measurement package. Click. So we want to make the draft measurement package available by the end of 2023, noting this will be a draft, after incorporating feedback from all of you, from the GFA in particular. We then want to conduct country consultations to refine the package in the first quarter of 2024. And specifically, we want to meet with country stakeholders to assess the usability of the package and its challenges and successes. And we also want to engage young people as part of these consultations. Click. And we then plan to have the package finalized for broader distribution and use by May 2024. Click. We're also planning a next phase of work on the package if there's interest from countries and if there's funding available. So let's see. So how can you take action? So each one of you, regardless of your role, can become a data champion, and we highly encourage you to become a data champion. So depending on your role, here are some actions that you can take, but there are many others. These are just examples. Click. So for adolescents and young people, and also other country stakeholders, you can identify available data and use it for action. And as I mentioned, there's a 2-page guide available for download to help you with this. Click. For regional and global stakeholders, we suggest 2 actions that you can take. First, you can support countries to use current data and make plans for filling gaps, really important. And second, you can generate discussion around the national action indicators, in particular to facilitate cross-country learning between countries. Click. And finally, for donors, in addition to supporting countries directly, you could also consider supporting global technical assistance to ensure that this package can really be implemented at the global level. Also really important. So please help us by writing in the chat what support and guidance you think would be most helpful for strengthening measurement of adolescent well-being in your country. That would be really helpful. And then I'm going to hand it back to Regina.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Titus. Thank you, all of the presenters. And of course, thank you, all of you who have joined our session today. With the last few minutes, we would like to hand the floor to Dr. Zoya Rizvi from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in India. Over to you, Zoya, for your remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Regina. I'll try and keep my remarks very short. Just 2-3 points on behalf of the Government of India is that we know India is the most populous country with the largest number of young people. Currently, we have about 253 million, and we are reaching about 300 million by the end of this decade. So that's a huge responsibility on the government, but also to say that this is a very good idea to have a national standard approach for data measurement, but the countries should be given some kind of flexibility, because as Titus also mentioned earlier on, that each adolescent and young person is unique. In fact, within India, there is so much variation between one state to another that a lot of planning and implementation of programs is very state specific. So having said that, but it is always good to have data which informs policy. And that is what we have done in India. We are already one of the countries which is implementing a national adolescent health program, wherein we are accessing, in fact, reaching the young people where they are. So we are reaching them in our health facilities, government health facilities. We are reaching them in schools, and we are also reaching them in communities. So our program implementation is one way very strong, because we work with our partner ministries. We are working with education. We are working with skilling. We are working with women welfare, rural development, urban development. Wherever services or any programs for young people are there, we are coordinating with the other ministries. Just a short example, we also realize that children who go to schools are influenced by teachers. So we are training teachers into transacting health and wellness sessions through our health and wellness program. We are training our medical officers to provide adolescent-friendly health services wherever they are posted. We are training our auxiliary nurse midwives also on provision of adolescent-friendly services. We are involving parents because we have realized that parents are a very essential part of how and where the young people access services. So there is a huge involvement of parents. And finally, last but not the least, we are working a lot with young people. We supported a G20 event where young people came across from across our country and as well as abroad, and who met with the policy makers, and there was a lot of interaction into what they really want. Besides that, we also have regional meetings to get feedback about our national adolescent health program, where peer educators are trained on very important issues of young people, whether it is sexual reproductive health, whether it is nutrition, violence, including gender-based violence, mental health, how to keep themselves healthy and fine. So that feedback also is a process which we keep getting back from these young people so that we can support them as much as possible. So I think, yes, we are on the right track, but all of us realize that data is a very good way of assessing where we have reached. And that is the importance of having regular data measurement, which our country as a whole, we do have National Family Health Survey, which takes place every 4 to 5 years, and the latest one is already underway. So that is the importance of actually acknowledging the fact that data will help us drive and strengthen the program, and that is what we are doing here in the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zoya, for these remarks from a country perspective. And again, thank you so much to all of the speakers today, and of course to the audience that you have joined us today. Thanks a lot. We will be going carefully through all of your comments in the chat, and we will use them to inform the next steps to finalize the measurement approach for adolescent well-being. Thank you and goodbye.